A Mafia wedding, a secret child. One accidental photo changes everything. The Don's empire, his life, his love, all on the line. Who will survive when the Rossi heir is revealed? Watch till the end to see the wolf choose family over power. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the full saga. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching me from? Let's see how far the wolf's story reaches. Now get ready for a tale of power, betrayal, and a secret Rossi heir. The warehouse breathed cold. Cold like winter steel. Cold like death. Concrete walls swallowed the fluorescent lights, turning everything into harsh shadows and sharp edges. The air felt brittle enough to shatter. Lorenzo, the wolf. Rossi stood in the center of it all, a silhouette carved out of darkness. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to move. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge. Silent, lethal, undeniable. A rival gang boss knelt at his feet. A man once feared in his own right, now reduced to trembling flesh, blood dripping down his face, breath sharp and uneven. Lorenzo circled him slowly, every step calculated. He never rushed a verdict. He savored the truth before the punishment. The Rossi men formed a wide ring around them, silent as wolves awaiting their alpha's command. Some exchanged uneasy glances. Even they felt the tension in the air, coiled tight as piano wire. Lorenzo's gloved hand lifted, a simple gesture, but enough to seal the kneeling man's fate. He was about to give the order, a single word away from ending a life. Then, his encrypted phone pinged, a small sound barely audible, but to Lorenzo it struck like a blade to the spine. No one messaged him during business. No one dared. His hand paused mid-air. A few of his men stiffened, confused. The captive blinked, unsure if fate had granted him a miracle or prolonged his agony. Lorenzo slowly lowered his hand and reached into his coat. He checked the screen and froze. A photo filled the display. Colorful balloons, a clutter of birthday cupcakes, a cake iced in messy blue letters, Leo's 5th birthday. But all of that, the decor, the noise, the innocence, vanished from Lorenzo's perception, because in the middle of that picture stood a woman he never expected to see again, Isabella Conti, the ghost who had haunted every dark corner of his memory. She looked older by a handful of years, but somehow more beautiful, softer, stronger, a quiet fierceness beneath the smile she wore. Lorenzo's jaw clenched so hard he tasted blood, and in her arms, a child, a boy. He had dark hair that curled at the ends, like Isabella's used to when she woke up on warm mornings, a gentle smile, dimpled and warm, but the eyes, ice blue, sharp, cold, unmistakable, the trademark eyes of the Rossi lineage. Lorenzo took a single step back, chest tightening, the warehouse blurred, time warped, his son, a 5-year-old boy with his eyes. The photo vanished from the screen, deleted seconds later, but it didn't matter. The image was burned into him, a brand seared into the core of his being. The Don's voice, normally iron, cracked for a fraction of a second. Stop everything. His men looked at one another, startled, wide-eyed. Lorenzo Rossi did not freeze. He did not hesitate. He did not crack. But here he was, standing utterly motionless, staring at a blank screen as though it held the keys to life or death. The kneeling rival blinked in disbelief. Nobody moved. Lorenzo didn't care about the negotiation anymore, didn't care about the deal, didn't care about the man begging at his feet. He turned away from all of it, from the power he'd built, from the empire he'd protected with blood, from the image of the man he had to be. He walked toward the warehouse exit, each step fueled by a chaotic, unraveling storm. Behind him, the captive mustered enough courage or stupidity to speak. "You just made a mistake, Don Rossi." Lorenzo didn't turn, didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge him, because everything he thought he understood about his past had just twisted into something darker, deeper, more dangerous. If Isabella had kept a child from him, if others found out, if rivals discovered a secret Rossi heir, that boy's life wouldn't just be fragile. It would be a countdown. A Rossi heir could ignite a war bigger than anything the underworld had seen in decades. Lorenzo stepped outside into the night. Cold wind slapped across his face, but it barely registered. His pulse thundered in his ears. His fingers closed around the phone, gripping it so tightly the metal casing groaned. He replayed the photo in his mind again and again. Isabella's arms around that child, his blood, his legacy, and she thought she could hide him, protect him from the world, protect him from Lorenzo. A dozen questions screamed in his skull. Why did she leave? Why hide the boy? Who else knew? Was the child safe? His breath came slow and dangerous. He had to find her. He had to find the boy, and he had to find out who else might be hunting them. Behind him, the warehouse door creaked as one of his men stepped out to speak. But before a word was spoken, a faint red dot flickered onto Lorenzo's chest. A sniper's scope. Invisible in the shadows, silent, patient, calculating. The final warning before death. Lorenzo didn't notice. He was too consumed by the ghost of a 5-year-old smile. Across the dark rooftop, the sniper exhaled slowly, finger tightening on the trigger. The scope's crosshair steadied over Lorenzo's heart. The night held its breath. Then, a gunshot cracked through the darkness. Who fired? And who was the real target? Lorenzo, or the secret child he didn't know he had? The gunshot tore through the night like a blade through silk. Sharp, sudden, vicious. Concrete dust exploded beside Lorenzo's head as the bullet struck the pillar inches from him. Chips of stone sprayed across his cheek, stinging like burning embers. His men reacted instantly, instinctively. Weapons drawn, bodies moving as a single lethal unit. "Get the Dawn behind cover!" someone barked. Boots thundered across the pavement. Hands grabbed Lorenzo's arms, dragging him backward, shielding him with human walls of muscle and steel. But Lorenzo barely registered any of it. His pulse didn't spike. His breath didn't hitch. Fear never touched him. Because in that moment, none of it mattered. Not bullets, not enemies, not death. Only the buzzing vibration against his palm. Another message. From the same unknown number, the number that should have never existed. Lorenzo stepped behind a stack of shipping crates as gunfire crackled overhead, but his eyes were fixed on the glowing screen. A new text appeared. "I'm sorry. Wrong group. Forget you saw it." He read the words once, twice, a third time. His spine locked. His lungs tightened. His heart, normally a machine built for war, misfired painfully in his chest. Only one person in the world could send him words that could cut deeper than any bullet. Isabella, a name he hadn't spoken aloud in 6 years. A name he'd forced himself to bury behind power, violence, and the cold armor of leadership. She'd slipped through his fingers the night everything collapsed. The night gunfire tore through their world, the night betrayal shattered the fragile peace between their families. Lorenzo had convinced himself she was gone, maybe dead, maybe hiding, maybe choosing a life far from him because she no longer loved him. He'd never allowed himself to consider she was hiding because of something else, someone else, a child, his child. His throat constricted. His fingers curled around the phone like he could strangle the truth out of it. Behind him, Marco, his underboss, yelled over the chaos, "Boss, sniper at the northeast roof, stay down!" But Lorenzo moved with sudden purpose, sprinting across the gravel toward the black SUVs. "Don!" Marco shouted, chasing him. "Don Rossi, stop! Where are you going?" Lorenzo didn't slow, didn't look back, didn't explain. He yanked open the car door, his voice low, deadly calm. "To get answers." Marco caught the door before it slammed. His face was tense, eyes darting to the rooftop where the sniper had disappeared. "Answers?" Marco repeated. Now? Boss, we have the Morettis breathing down our necks. Your wedding is in 3 days. Alessia's father expects you in New York by morning. The wedding, Lorenzo said, each word sharp enough to cut steel, can wait. Marco's skin paled. This wasn't defiance. This wasn't stubbornness. This was madness. Lorenzo, he whispered, slipping into first-name desperation, do you know what will happen if her father learns you walked away from the alliance? He'll skin us all alive. Lorenzo's eyes flicked up, glowing with a cold, murderous finality. He'll learn nothing. Marco swallowed. Hard. Because they both knew the truth. If the Morettis found out Lorenzo had a secret heir, a child of Rossi blood, they would remove that threat before it ever grew old enough to claim power. A Rossi heir threatened alliances, threatened dynasties, threatened empires. Marco lowered his voice. That child, if he's real, he's in danger. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. I know. The engine roared to life. Gravel spiraled beneath the tires as the convoy tore away from the warehouse district. Lorenzo's thoughts spiraled faster. The look in Isabella's eyes from the photo. The way she'd held the child, his child, with instinctive protectiveness. The way the message tried to undo the truth she'd accidentally revealed. Forget you saw it. As if he could. Another buzz, another message. Lorenzo's chest constricted as he read it. Don't come looking. You'll destroy everything. He typed back instantly, the words mechanical from how hard he forced them. Where is he? His thumb hovered, waiting. Seconds dragged. No response. No typing dots. Nothing. The silence thickened like concrete poured around his lungs. Then, a new ping. Lorenzo inhaled sharply, but the sender wasn't Isabella. It wasn't her number. It wasn't her voice. It wasn't the ghost he'd chased for years. The message was from a different contact name, Sofia Conti, Isabella's older sister, fiercely loyal, fiercely dangerous, fiercely protective of her family. He opened the message. Not text, a video. The screen filled with the dim interior of Sofia's quiet Sicilian bookstore. Bookshelves lined with old leather spines, pages fluttering from a broken window, sunlight replaced by shadows. Sofia appeared on screen, breathing hard, eyes sharp as knives. Behind her, through the front windows, armed men surrounding the store, moving into position. Her voice was low, controlled, but edged with urgency. If you come, she said, glaring into the camera, come alone. The video ended. The screen went black. Lorenzo's pulse went deadly still. This wasn't fear. This wasn't hesitation. This was the calm that came before the storm, the moment Lorenzo Rossi became everything the world feared. He raised his eyes to the road ahead, voice barely above a whisper. Drive faster. His men exchanged uneasy looks. Marco muttered a curse, because they all understood exactly what this meant. Whoever was surrounding that bookstore, whoever had found Sofia Conti, wasn't after Sofia. They were after information. Information about Isabella, information about the boy, information about a Rossi heir. Lorenzo leaned back, jaw clenched hard enough to crack bone. If Sofia was caught, if they forced her to talk, then Isabella and the child would be hunted next. His son would be hunted next. The SUV accelerated, engine roaring like a beast let loose. But Lorenzo's phone buzzed again. One final message from Sofia. A single line of text. They know about the boy. Lorenzo's vision darkened at the edges. Someone else had seen the photo. Someone else knew the truth. Someone else was circling in. And they were close. Too close. As the convoy sped toward the coast, toward the Conti bookstore, toward danger, the phone buzzed once more. A live video request. From Sofia. Lorenzo accepted instantly. The screen lit up. Shaky, frantic, showing Sofia crouched behind a fallen bookshelf, breath ragged, whispering urgently, Lorenzo, they're inside. Behind her, silhouettes moved through the aisles, guns raised. They want Isabella. Sophia said. "They want the child. They know he exists." Her voice broke. "Don't bring your men. If they see your soldiers, they'll kill everyone in this store." Glass shattered. Someone shouted. Boots pounded closer. Sophia looked straight into the camera, eyes blazing with a mix of fear and fury. "If you come," she repeated, "come alone." The video abruptly cut off. Lorenzo stares at the blank screen as Sophia's last words echo, while someone on the video, off camera, growls, "Find the sister and make her talk." The Sicilian wind knifed through the narrow street as Lorenzo stepped toward the dim bookstore, its wooden sign swinging like a warning. No one bothered to speak aloud. Salt from the nearby sea clung to the air, mingling with dust kicked up from centuries-old stones, but none of it masked the scent of danger he had followed across an entire country. His footsteps were silent, practiced, lethal, yet the quiet around him felt unnatural. Too still, as if the entire coast held its breath because the wolf had arrived. He pushed the creaking door open with the steady composure of a man who'd walked into ambushes all his life. And the sight inside was chaos disguised as literature. Books lay gutted open across the floor, pages torn as if someone believed secrets were hidden between printed lines. Shelves leaned at crooked angles from impact, a chair lay overturned, and a single overhead bulb flickered in erratic pulses, casting long, trembling shadows. In the center of it all stood Sophia Conti, her posture rigid, chin raised, fury in every inch of her stance. Her eyes, dark, sharp, unbroken, locked onto him like a blade pressed against his throat. "You shouldn't be here," she spat, voice laced with the kind of hatred that only grows from love turned into absolute fear. Lorenzo shut the door without looking away, scanning the damage with a predator's instinct. "You sent the video," he said. "You called me here." Sophia stepped forward, slamming a crumpled photograph onto the counter with enough force to make the metal bell beside it jingle. The picture was of Leo, laughing, wild, sunlight tangled in his hair, joy written all over a face that had never seen the kind of darkness Lorenzo commanded. Lorenzo felt something dangerous coil inside him at the sight, an emotion he crushed instantly, though the remnants still burned at the back of his throat. Sophia saw it. Of course she did, and her lip curled in disgust. "You don't get to feel anything," she hissed. "You don't get to look at him like he's suddenly yours. Isabella hid him because your world kills children, Lorenzo, because your name is a death sentence." Her voice cracked, not with weakness, but with the rage of someone who had buried too many people because of someone else's wars. Lorenzo met her glare with a calm so cold it bordered on inhuman. "Where is she?" he asked softly. That softness was the real threat. Sophia froze for half a heartbeat, then gave a bitter, humorless laugh. "Far from you." She stabbed each word at him like a knife. The air tightened, the silence humming with unspoken histories, gunfire, betrayal, shattered vows, a wedding ring thrown across a floor stained with someone's blood. Sophia held her ground as if she were daring him to cross it. But before Lorenzo could take another step, metal kissed the back of his skull, a gun barrel cold enough to burn. The shift was instant. His muscles coiled, breath slowed, heartbeat steadied. The masked intruder behind him smelled of cordite and cheap aftershave, breathing too fast for a professional. "Don Rossi," the man said, voice dripping arrogance. "You shouldn't have come alone." Sophia's eyes widened, not in guilt, but in the sickening realization of who had really brought danger to her doorstep. Lorenzo didn't move, didn't flinch. He didn't need to. He recognized the voice, the accent. One of the Moretti cartel's pet assassins. And if one was here, others were close. "Alessia's father sends his regards," the gunman whispered, pressing the barrel harder, "and his condolences." Something snapped inside Lorenzo. In the space of a breath, he exploded into motion, grabbing the gunman's wrist, twisting until bone cracked like a breaking branch. The gun fired, the bullet tearing through a shelf as books burst into a snowstorm of shredded pages. Lorenzo drove the intruder backward, slamming his head against the corner of a bookcase. Wood splintered. Dust filled the air. Blood smeared across a spine of Dante's Inferno. The assassin struggled, but it was pointless. Lorenzo moved with the fury of a man who had been hunted his entire life and refused to die before understanding the boy in that photograph. He disarmed him, smashed a fist into his ribs hard enough to make the man fold, and threw him across the room like discarded trash. The entire struggle lasted less than 6 seconds. Sophia stared, breathing hard, torn between horror and the reluctant acknowledgement of what he was capable of. Before she could decide if he was their salvation or their doom, Lorenzo stepped toward her. Slow, deliberate, covered in the violence he never bothered to hide. Sophia's hand trembled slightly, but her voice didn't when she finally spoke. "I'll tell you where Isabella is," she whispered. A tremor behind her words that held something dangerously close to desperation. "But once you go, there's no turning back. You'll drag war to her doorstep, and she'll never forgive you for it." Lorenzo's expression didn't change. "Tell me," he said, "now." Sophia's jaw clenched, then slowly, reluctantly, she reached beneath the counter. For a split second, Lorenzo prepared for a weapon, but she instead pulled out a folded piece of paper, edges torn, writing smudged from being handled too many times. She held it out with a hand that refused to steady. "Take it," she said, "but understand. The Morettis aren't looking for you anymore." A chill ran down the back of Lorenzo's neck. "What do you mean?" Sophia swallowed, eyes shining with fear she could no longer hide. "They're already on their way," she whispered, voice barely audible. "Not to kill you," her breath shuddered, "to kill her." She placed the address into his hand, an isolated location carved into the Italian countryside. The air felt suffocating, charged, electric with dawning horror. Lorenzo stared at the ink, the letters blurring into something monstrous. The world sharpened around him, every instinct screaming the truth he didn't want to face. Isabella was no longer hiding. She was being hunted. Lorenzo looked up from the address, just as every light in the bookstore blew out at once, plunging them into darkness, and the unmistakable click of multiple rifle safeties echoed from outside. Lorenzo's car tore across the winding roads of the Italian countryside like a living nightmare, tires scraping gravel, engine roaring like a beast born from the underworld itself. Darkness clung to the olive groves and cypress trees lining the narrow lanes, twisting them into grotesque shapes in the headlights. But Lorenzo didn't see the trees. He didn't see the road. Every fiber of his being was focused on the address pressed into his palm, on the pulse of his heart, and the thought that Isabella, or worse, Leo, might already be in mortal danger. His hands gripped the wheel with a force that made knuckles white. Yet there was a precision to it, a calm within the storm only a man forged in blood could hold. The countryside blurred, fields stretching into shadow, hills rising and falling like waves in a dark, restless sea. Every mile brought him closer, yet the anticipation twisted tighter in his chest, a coil of fury and fear that threatened to snap. In his mind, 1,000 scenarios played out simultaneously. Ambushes, betrayals, the possibility that the boy he had never held, never protected, never known, was in the hands of men who would not hesitate. And then the farmhouse appeared, isolated and stubborn against the horizon, bathed in moonlight, smoke curling from a small chimney, lights dim and flickering inside. He slowed only enough to breathe, to observe, and when he saw her standing in the yard, Isabella, strong, unflinching, a pistol glinting in the waistband of her jeans, he felt the first jolt of both relief and renewed tension. She didn't flee. She didn't wail or throw herself into his arms. She just stood there, wine tugging at her hair, the clothesline snapping with the breeze, and eyes fixed on him with 1,000 unspoken words. Her voice broke the silence like glass. "You found us." It was calm, measured, yet the tremor beneath her words betrayed all the years of fear, anger, and what might have been love. Lorenzo stepped from the car, boots crunching the gravel, heart hammering against his ribs. Every instinct screamed caution. He could smell the tension in the air, the faint tang of gun oil, old wood, and a hint of the sea. "Where is he?" he demanded, voice low but commanding, carrying the authority that had crushed entire empires. Isabella's gaze flickered to the doorway of the house. In the house, sleeping. His pulse stuttered, chest tightening as the reality hit him. His son, his blood, lying just meters away, unprotected in the middle of an open battlefield he hadn't yet entered. "Why did you hide him from me?" he asked, voice rough with a mixture of rage, disbelief, and a pain he could never show the world. She swallowed, eyes steady now, meeting his gaze without flinching. "You were becoming a man who would get his own family killed. I left to save him, and to save you from yourself." That statement struck him like a blow. Rage flared, boiling against the heartbreak that had never left him. "You had no right," he growled, stepping closer, the wind whipping around them like the ghosts of their past. "I had every right," she whispered back, the steel in her tone slicing through the tension. "Leo deserves to live." The words hit him harder than any bullet ever could. He opened his mouth to argue, to justify, to claim what was his, by blood, by legacy, but before another word could leave him, tires screamed across the gravel drive. The wind shifted with the sound, carrying a scent Lorenzo didn't need to identify: diesel, gunpowder, and the unmistakable acrid tang of imminent violence. Isabella's eyes widened in terror, and for the first time, he saw her break. Not entirely, but enough to reveal the stakes. "They found us," she whispered, voice trembling but laced with warning. Lorenzo's mind snapped into action, years of training, survival, and ruthless command converging into clarity. He scanned the horizon, calculating, anticipating, already moving mentally into battle formations, strategies, and contingencies. Every second mattered. Every move could be the difference between life and death, not just for him, but for Isabella, for Leo, for the fragile life they were now protecting. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the rolling hills, bending with the moonlight, distorting the shapes into something monstrous, and then they appeared. Black SUVs like predatory beasts cresting the hill, engines growling, headlights cutting through the darkness with surgical precision. Soldiers poured out, weapons raised, tactical, cold, and ready to annihilate anything in their path. Lorenzo's jaw tightened, eyes narrowing to slits as adrenaline and instinct fused into lethal clarity. He reached for his weapon, but the wind, the night, the smell of ozone, and the distant crashing surf combined to create a sense of inevitable chaos. Isabella stepped behind him, hand brushing the grip of his gun without touching it, silently aligning herself with him in the storm. The farmhouse, the yard, the olive trees, they all became part of the battlefield he already commanded in his mind. Every breath, every heartbeat, every twitch of muscle mattered. He could almost hear the soldiers coordinating, could feel the tension vibrating in the air like a live wire. And then he saw movement on the hill, flashlights sweeping, shadows darting, strategically advancing, the sound of boots striking gravel, the glint of metal. The deadly seriousness in their motions told him one thing: Moretti forces had no intention of negotiating. They came to kill, to take, to destroy. His son was in that house. Isabella's life hung by a thread, and Lorenzo Rossi, the wolf, had just arrived at the edge of a slaughter he could not avoid. The wind whipped harder, carrying the scent of pine and salt and fear. He could feel his heartbeat syncing with the pulse of the night. Every nerve alive, every muscle tense, every thought razor sharp. And as the SUVs stopped, doors slammed open, and the first soldiers aimed their rifles toward the farmhouse. Lorenzo raised his chin and stepped forward, shoulders squared, the storm of fury and focus radiating from him like heat from molten steel. The night itself seemed to hold its breath as the first gunmetal glint appeared above the hill, the shadows of trained killers stretching toward them, and he realized the fight for his son had already begun. A deafening roar of engines and boots hit the gravel simultaneously as the Moretti soldiers opened fire, sending the first spray of bullets toward the farmhouse. Lorenzo barely had time to draw, and Isabella's gasp was lost in the chaos as the wind carried a voice from the hill above. "Leave now, Don Rossi, or die with her." The air vibrated with the certainty of death, and in that instant, Lorenzo understood. The battle for Leo had begun, and only one side would walk away alive. Gunfire ripped through the night like a pack of wolves tearing flesh from bone, a relentless staccato drum of violence that shook the farmhouse to its foundations. Bullets shattered windows, splintered wood, and ripped holes into walls that had stood untouched for decades. The air was thick with the smell of cordite, smoke, and the metallic tang of fear. Lorenzo moved with a precision that was almost inhuman, senses sharpened to a lethal edge, muscles coiled like springs ready to snap. Every shadow, every reflection, every sound was registered, cataloged, and immediately acted upon. Behind him, Isabella pressed Leo against her chest, her fingers tightening on the child as though sheer force could keep him alive, could keep the world from discovering what she had spent years hiding. His son's cry, sharp and trembling, sliced through Lorenzo's focus, narrowing his entire existence to that one sound, the unmistakable, unbreakable tether of blood. "Stay with him!" he barked over the chaos, gripping his weapon with both hands, eyes darting to every point of entry. "I'll handle this." Isabella shook her head violently, voice fierce and trembling at once. "No, you can't fight them all. You'll die. We'll die." Her panic only ignited the storm inside him. Lorenzo's gaze froze hers, ice-blue eyes boring through the fear, the desperation. "I don't need to fight all of them," he said softly, each word a promise of death. "Just the first wave." The first wave hit like a hurricane. Windows shattered in shards of glass, a rain of splintered wood and bullets filling the room with chaos. Lorenzo's body became a weapon, moving faster than thought, striking before reflex. A Moretti soldier swung at him with a rifle butt. He caught it, twisted the man's wrist, and flipped him into a wall with bone-breaking precision. Another lunged from the corner. Knife in hand, Lorenzo disarmed him mid-swing and drove him into the ceiling beam. The floor became a battlefield of splintered furniture, books, and blood, every footstep calculated to provide cover, every breath measured to conserve energy for the kill. Isabella dragged Leo behind a toppled table, clutching him so tight that the boy's cries transformed into muffled sobs. The child's small, trembling hands gripped her neck as she whispered promises she didn't know if she could keep. Lorenzo's eyes swept the room, calculating, adapting, anticipating the next attack. And then a grenade rolled across the floor, a cruel, metallic orb of death. Isabella screamed, the sound tearing through the storm of gunfire and shouts. Lorenzo lunged without hesitation, slamming his body over her and Leo, feeling the impact of the explosion through his bones, through his flesh. Smoke engulfed them, burning lungs and eyes, choking, blinding, but he refused to release his hold. Time stretched in a nightmare of twisting debris, dust, and the acrid stench of blood and fire. When the explosion subsided, silence fell like a heavy shroud, pierced only by groans of the injured and the distant commands of Moretti soldiers regrouping outside. Lorenzo rolled, weapon raised, scanning the ruined interior. Every inch of the house was now a battlefield, every shadow a potential killer. He heard the soft scuff of boots against the broken wood. A boot kicked down the door, slow, deliberate, calculated, the sound of impending death. A man stepped in, more composed than the first wave, a lieutenant of the Moretti cartel, rifle aimed squarely at Leo. "You shouldn't exist, boy!" the man spat, voice devoid of mercy, eyes glittering with lethal intent. A flash of rage, of instinct surged through Lorenzo. In a heartbeat, he moved, a blur of deadly precision, lunging forward with the force of a storm. The man's rifle swung, a single finger on the trigger, and then a gunshot echoed through the smoke-filled room. Time fractured. The world seemed to tilt and shudder. Lorenzo felt the recoil, the vibrations of life or death on his chest, the impact resonating through his core. Isabella screamed, voice breaking as she braced herself over Leo, instinct screaming for protection. The echoes of that single shot rippled through the shattered walls, carrying a deadly question. Who had fallen? The lieutenant staggered, or perhaps it was Lorenzo. The moment was obscured, lost in a cloud of dust, splintered wood, and smoke. Leo's frightened cry pierced the tension, but it was impossible to tell if it was the sound of survival or the witness to tragedy. Outside, the remaining soldiers paused, recalculating, uncertain, as the sound of one gunshot altered everything. And in that suspended moment, Lorenzo realized with a cold certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. The farmhouse was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a crucible of fate, fire, and blood, and the first true test of his loyalty, his fury, and his capacity to protect what was his, the life of his son, had begun. Every instinct told him that the next second could be the one that ended everything, but retreat was impossible, surrender unthinkable, and failure fatal. Smoke swirled around the shattered doorway, obscuring the figures inside the farmhouse. And through the haze, a single voice called out, low, chilling, unmistakable, "Don Rossi, you should have stayed in New York." A second gunshot cracked through the air, and everything inside the farmhouse froze in that split second of terror, leaving Lorenzo, Isabella, and Leo hanging on the edge between life and annihilation. The smoke from the grenade and gunfire lingered in the air like a dense fog, curling around splintered wood, shattered glass, and the scent of burned gunpowder, stinging eyes and lungs alike. Every shadow in the farmhouse seemed alive, stretching and twisting with the flames that licked the ceiling. Lorenzo struggled to his knees, blood dripping from a gash along his forearm, warm and sticky against his skin. Pain surged, but it was distant. Background noise to the adrenaline roaring in his veins. He scanned the ruined room, eyes flicking over the splintered furniture and shards of glass, the way a predator would examine a fallen lair, noting what could be used, what could kill. And then he saw the lieutenant, the Moretti officer who had aimed at his son, lying prone, chest torn open, life bleeding out in dark, spreading pools across the floorboards. The sight should have provoked relief, yet all Lorenzo felt was sharp, jagged tension, the awareness that more were coming. Always more. Behind the fallen man, Sophia emerged from a cloud of smoke, rifle still raised, barrel blackened, the acrid smell of gunfire clinging to her like a second skin. "You two attract more trouble than a cursed coin," she muttered, voice low, almost amused, almost exasperated. She didn't smile. She couldn't. Yet the edge of admiration in her gaze was unmistakable as she noted Lorenzo's posture, the way he moved despite the blood, the way his eyes never left the horizon. Lorenzo's fingers flexed around his own weapon, yet instinct demanded he check on the two most important lives in the room. Isabella rushed toward him, fear sharp in her movements. "You're hurt," she began, reaching for him, but he caught her wrist in a tight, controlled grip. "You and Leo," he said, voice iron-wrapped in urgency. "First." She hesitated for just a heartbeat, eyes wide, lips parted, before she registered the weight behind his words and instinctively stepped back to shield their son. Leo clung to her shirt, small hands pulling at fabric as though it were a lifeline. His wide, curious eyes found Lorenzo's, the same ice blue of the Rossi line blazing through him even at 5 years old. "Mama, is that man my dad?" he asked softly, almost shyly, yet the question cut through the tension like a scalpel. Isabella froze, the world tilting around her as past and present collided. Lorenzo's breath hitched, chest tightening, not from pain, not from the wound in his arm, but from recognition. From the connection that spanned years of separation, betrayal, and love unspoken. His hand trembled slightly, but his eyes never wavered from the child, from Isabella, from the fragile line that connected them all. Sophia's gaze swept the horizon, sharp, calculating. "More cars incoming. They'll surround us in less than 5 minutes. We can't stay here." The reality of the situation pressed in, suffocating, yet Lorenzo's mind ran faster, calculating escape routes, crossfire advantages, and ways to shield both his child and Isabella. "We leave together. All of us," he said, voice carrying the weight of command and the unyielding promise of protection. Isabella hesitated, fear and years of caution warring with a flicker of old love. But the tug of her child, the glance toward Lorenzo, made her choice inevitable. Just as she nodded, the sound of mechanical wings cut through the tension. A drone hovering above, camera lens glinting in the moonlight, casting a red dot that pulsed against Isabella's chest like a heartbeat. Her breath caught, eyes widening, hands instinctively rising to her son, ready to shield him. Lorenzo moved, hand tightening on his weapon, but the movement was futile. The dot held, laser precise, unwavering. His blood ran cold. The sound of the whirring drone seemed amplified, cutting through the chaos as he assessed distance, angle, and trajectory. Sophia cursed under her breath, sliding behind a fallen bookshelf while keeping sight on the air above. "Snipers!" she spat, teeth gritted. "They've got a line on her! They're not messing around!" The farmhouse, once a fragile sanctuary, became a cage, every doorway, window, and shattered wall a potential kill zone. The tension built in tangible layers, thick and suffocating, every second stretching into eternity, as the drone hovered, red dot laser dancing on Isabella's chest, reflecting in Leo's wide, innocent eyes. The sniper's finger was poised on the trigger, somewhere in the shadows beyond the hills, and all Lorenzo could do was wait, calculate, and react in the space between life and death. The moment stretched, heavy and endless, until a single gunshot cracked the night, but the target, the victim, the casualty remained unseen, lost in smoke, chaos, and the deafening roar of fear and adrenaline. Isabella's scream, Leo's cry, and Lorenzo's roar of fury collided, leaving the farmhouse suspended on the edge of disaster. In that heartbeat, the 3 lives were tethered to fate by nothing more than Lorenzo's reflexes, Sophia's courage, and the thin thread of chance that could snap at any second. As the smoke swirled and the echoes of gunfire faded into the night, Lorenzo's eyes scanned the room, only to see a shadow detach itself from the doorway. A figure emerged, weapon trained, face hidden, but the familiarity in the stance, the certainty in the aim, and the cold precision made him freeze. A voice, smooth and icy, cut through the chaos. "Don Rossi, you've reached the end of the line." The smell of gunpowder still clung to the shattered farmhouse as Lorenzo's hands were slick with sweat and blood, adrenaline pumping so violently it seemed to thrum in the walls around him. The night had become a living, breathing storm of chaos, shadows, and the metallic tang of fear. A single bullet had screamed through the doorway moments ago, tearing splinters from wood and whistling past his ears, and he had tackled Isabella instinctively, dropping to the cold, dusty floor with the precision of a predator, protecting what was his. Her arms had wrapped instinctively around Leo, trembling, but Sophia had been faster, dragging the boy beneath a toppled table, a human shield wrapped in the older sister's desperate courage. Lorenzo's gaze swept the shattered room, registering every detail, the dust in the air, the smoke curling around splintered beams, the faint glint of a rifle barrel poking from the orchard outside. Outside, the sniper, Moretti trained, calculating, patient, adjusted for a second shot, his laser sight cutting through the night, red and merciless against the faint moonlight. Lorenzo felt the fury ignite in his chest, like molten steel, a fire he had nurtured in the dark corners of his empire, but rarely allowed to consume him in public. "You're not touching her, or him," he growled, voice low, dangerous, carrying the weight of everything he had lost and could never allow to happen again. Before anyone could react, he bolted from cover, vaulting through the broken doorway into the orchard, dodging between twisted trees and scattered debris, weaving like a shadow born of the night. His boots tore through grass, leaving prints in the mud, eyes locked on the faint silhouette of the sniper nest ahead. The world shrank to the rhythm of his heartbeat, the faint snap of branches underfoot, and the glint of metal against moonlight. He reached the sniper in less than 10 heartbeats, a teenage mercenary, hands trembling as the barrel of the rifle quivered. "Don Rossi, I was ordered," the boy stammered, voice cracking with fear and adrenaline. Lorenzo closed the distance with an economy of motion that was both brutal and deliberate, snatching the rifle from the boy's hands in one fluid movement and snapping it like a twig. The rifle fell in pieces to the ground, the echo of its destruction resonating across the orchard. He leaned close, ice-blue eyes burning into the youth's soul. "You aim at my family again," he hissed, voice sharper than any blade, "and there won't be enough left of you for a funeral." The boy stumbled back, tears welling, and fled into the night, leaving behind the rifle, leaving behind the fear, leaving behind a message that only Lorenzo could enforce with lethal clarity. Lorenzo turned, breath heavy, muscles tense, and found Isabella standing behind him, arms trembling, eyes wide with unspoken emotion. "You risked everything for us," she whispered, awe and disbelief mingling in her voice. He reached for her hand, brushing it lightly, voice low but fierce. "I already lost you once. I will not lose you again." The words were simple, but heavy with history, carrying the weight of 6 years of separation, betrayal, and love that had never faded. A brief moment of quiet passed between them, the kind of silence that comes only in the eye of a storm, before it shattered with the buzzing of Lorenzo's encrypted phone. He fished it from his coat pocket, eyes narrowing at the display. Marco's name flashed insistently. "Dawn. Alessia's father knows," the voice crackled through the speaker, urgency sharp as a knife. "He's demanding you return for the wedding tomorrow, or he kills every Rossi loyalist he can reach." Isabella froze, her breath catching in her chest, the words piercing her like shards of ice. Lorenzo's jaw clenched, expression hardening into the mask of command that had toppled empires. "I'm coming," he said, voice low, dangerous, carrying the promise of destruction to anyone who dared threaten his family. There was a pause on the line, heavy with tension, And then Marco added words that turned the fire in Lorenzo's chest into molten rage. Lorenzo, he also knows about the boy. The implication hung in the air like a guillotine blade, sharp and unforgiving. The son he had only just reclaimed, the fragile tether to Isabella and his future, was now a target in a war he had no choice but to fight. His eyes swept over Isabella and Leo, the weight of protection settling on his shoulders like a crown of iron. Every plan, every alliance, every betrayal he had endured led to this moment. The night was alive with menace. Moretti reinforcements converging on the farmhouse, and the knowledge that the boy, the child who carried his blood, was now a pawn in a game with stakes higher than death itself. Lorenzo clenched his fists, veins like coiled steel beneath his skin. There was no turning back, no negotiation, no mercy. The wolf had chosen his path, and it ran straight through fire, blood, and the heart of his enemies. Shadows shifted outside. Wind rustled through the olive trees, and distant engines signaled that the Moretti forces were on the move. The moonlight glinted off the edges of rifles, bullets poised to fly, and every heartbeat became a countdown. Lorenzo's mind raced, already calculating strikes, escapes, and counterattacks. But even as he prepared, a flicker of doubt haunted the edges of his consciousness. The boy, his son, now known to every enemy in the world. The weight of responsibility pressed down like lead, and then, from the line of broken trees, a familiar silhouette appeared, emerging with a deliberate calm that froze Lorenzo mid-breath. A figure stepped forward, weapon trained, presence radiating authority and lethal intent. The chill of recognition ran down Lorenzo's spine. The voice that followed was low, measured, and ice-cold. "Don Rossi, you've reached the end of the line." The figure raised the weapon with unerring precision, a deadly calm that spoke of years of experience, and before Lorenzo could react, the barrel's shadow fell across Leo's tiny chest, leaving the wolf frozen in a heartbeat where only one choice could save everything or doom them all. The fortified safe house hummed with quiet tension, a fortress built to withstand bullets, betrayal, and the weight of empires. Yet Lorenzo moved through it as though it were a cage, suffocating him with inevitability. He dressed slowly, methodically, each motion precise, deliberate, slipping into his tuxedo as though it were armor, each cuff and tie a layer of protection against the violence that waited for him outside. His eyes were ice, focused, yet beneath the surface simmered a storm of conflicting instincts. The duty to his empire, the need to protect his family, and the unspoken promise that he would never again allow power to dictate love. Isabella watched from the shadows, arms crossed, worry etched in every line of her face. The soft light fell on her features, highlighting the years of struggle and resilience. The shadows under her eyes from sleepless nights and the unbroken steel behind her gaze. "You walk into that villa," she whispered, voice tight, "and they'll kill you." Her words weren't just a warning. They were a prophecy, a thread of truth tangled with fear. Lorenzo didn't flinch. "If I don't go," he replied, voice low and measured, "they'll kill everyone else." The weight of that decision pressed down on him like an anchor, pulling him toward a confrontation that could consume his entire world. Leo peeked out from behind Sophia, small hands clutching a toy car, eyes wide and curious, uncomprehending yet instinctively aware of the danger that loomed. "Are you coming back?" the boy asked, his voice tentative, fragile, the innocence of 5 years old colliding with the brutal reality of a father he had just met. Lorenzo knelt, eyes level with his son, voice softened only for him, ice blue gaze holding a promise forged in blood and love. "Yes," he said, voice firm yet tender, "I swear it." Isabella's eyes glistened, the first tear escaping after years of fear and vigilance. The tension of their reunion compressed into a single heartbeat. The drive to the villa was a quiet storm of dread and anticipation. Lorenzo sat alone, armored by more than fabric, cunning, preparation, and the unyielding resolve that had earned him the name, the Wolf. Every shadow along the road, every headlight slicing through the dark, was a threat. Every mile was a step deeper into a nest of vipers, each one ready to strike, each one waiting for him to falter. As he arrived, the villa rose before him, gleaming, fortified, the opulent facade masking the lethal intentions inside. Cartel soldiers flanked the doors, their eyes sharp, weapons ready, instincts trained to recognize any hesitation, any misstep. Alessia waited at the altar, perfect and poised, fury veiled beneath a flawless mask of elegance, a weapon of beauty and intimidation. Beside her, her father stood like a stone statue, lips thin, eyes glinting with the lethal patience of a man who had built an empire on fear, control, and absolute obedience. The room hummed with tension, the subtle vibration of power and danger colliding in the air. "Where is the bridegroom's gratitude?" Alessia's father hissed, voice low but cutting, each word a blade. "Welcome to your own coronation." Lorenzo stepped forward, measured, deliberate. Every motion an assertion of control, every heartbeat a reminder that he was still the predator, not prey. Silence fell like a heavy curtain, the kind that suffocates and heightens every awareness. And then he spoke, voice echoing across the grand hall, resonant and cold as steel. "Actually," he began, letting the pause stretch, tension winding tighter like a spring ready to snap. "I came to end it." The words hung in the air, charged with the weight of betrayal, defiance, and a promise that the empire they had hoped to bind him into would crumble before the family he truly sought to protect. The soldiers stiffened, rifles lifting, eyes narrowing with the certainty that the next heartbeat would erupt into violence. Lorenzo reached into his pocket, deliberate, his hand slow, drawing the object into view. But it wasn't a ring, no symbol of alliance, no pledge to the cartel empire, no sign of submission. Instead, he held a small, simple photograph. The image was clear in the sterile light of the villa. Leo, smiling with unblemished innocence, eyes blazing the unmistakable ice blue of the Rossi bloodline. The room seemed to freeze. Heart skipped, the scent of perfume and gun oil mingling in the air. Soldiers instinctively gripped their rifles tighter, hesitation creeping in as the implications of the photograph sank like a stone into every calculated mind in the room. The wolf, the dawn, the master of empires had chosen blood over alliance, family over contracts, and his defiance was now laid bare for all to see. Silence stretched, a taut wire ready to snap. Every breath, every twitch of muscle, every calculation in the soldiers' minds was held hostage by the image Lorenzo displayed. Alessia's face paled just slightly, the practiced mask of fury faltering, revealing the flicker of fear beneath. Her father's eyes narrowed, and in them was the cold, lethal recognition that his carefully laid plans, his empire of intimidation, was on the verge of unraveling. Lorenzo's eyes swept the room, meeting soldier after soldier, gaze hard, implacable, promising death to any who dared strike at his blood. The photo was more than an image. It was a declaration of war, a challenge, a shield, and a sword, all in one. Every corner of the villa became a potential battlefield, every line of sight a threat. And yet Lorenzo stood calm, composed, a predator centered in the chaos he had created. The world waited, every second stretching into eternity, as if the air itself held its breath in anticipation of the storm about to erupt. The die had been cast. The family he had reclaimed, the son he had only just met, and the love he had fought to protect were now at the center of a war that would not end quietly. Every heartbeat in the room was a countdown, every twitch of a finger on a trigger, a potential catalyst for blood. And in that frozen instant, the wolf's decision radiated outward like a shockwave, touching every person in the grand hall with the inevitability of consequences they could not escape. The soldiers' rifles moved in unison, and Alessia's father's hand twitched toward a concealed pistol. The air snapped with tension as one of the Moretti guards whispered, "He's lost it. Or worse, he's playing with fire." Lorenzo's gaze hardened, photo still in hand, and he muttered under his breath, ice in his voice, "Try me." In that moment, the first shot rang out, but the camera cut to black before anyone knew who it would claim. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the grand villa like a sudden storm, tension vibrating through the marble floors and gilded ceilings, carrying with it the electric charge of fear, disbelief, and impending violence. Alessia's father, a man whose life had been defined by control, intimidation, and the precise orchestration of power, froze for a heartbeat, nostrils flaring as he processed the audacity before him. "You dare shame my daughter?" he hissed, each word slicing the air like a knife, laced with venom and authority that had toppled rivals for decades. But Lorenzo, standing tall, eyes ice blue and unyielding, held up the photo of his son, Leo, and his voice echoed through the grand hall with a weight that demanded attention, silence, and fear. "This is my son," he declared, every syllable a declaration of dominance and protection, the true Rossi heir. Shock, outrage, and disbelief washed over the room. Guests froze mid-step, servants ducked instinctively, and hidden corners of the villa seemed to hold their breath. The perfect calm Lorenzo exuded was a stark contrast to the chaos brewing around him, a predator poised in the eye of a storm. Slowly, subtly, his men, hidden among the guests for precisely this reason, shifted their positions, fingers brushing the grips of concealed weapons, eyes scanning for threats, ready to erupt into violence at the slightest command. "This wedding is over," Lorenzo continued, voice low and deadly, resonant with the authority of a man who had built empires and destroyed them with equal precision. "I protect my blood, not your empire." The words landed like a hammer strike, reverberating through the air, forcing every observer to weigh the consequences of further action. Alessia's father leaned forward, muscles coiled, eyes narrowing like a viper ready to strike. "Then you choose war," he spat, voice full of deadly certainty. Lorenzo's lips curved into a cold, calculated smirk, ice in every line of expression. "No," he replied, voice cutting through the tension. "I choose survival." With that, he tossed his Dawn's signet ring onto the polished marble floor at Alessia's feet, a final act of renunciation, a symbolic severing of the alliance, a challenge cast like a gauntlet to all present. Panic erupted instantly. Gunfire cracked, a thunderous storm that shattered glass and echoed through the villa's opulent halls. Guests screamed and dove for cover, flipping tables and hiding behind pillars, while chandeliers swayed ominously overhead. Lorenzo sprinted toward the exit, instincts honed over decades guiding each step, each movement measured for speed and efficiency. His loyal guards fell into place around him like a living shield. Weapons at the ready, bodies pressed outward to intercept anyone foolish enough to approach. The world contracted to the narrow tunnel of his escape. Adrenaline and instinct fused into a singular focus: protect what was his. But as he reached the open courtyard, a ripple of danger struck his spine. A cartel sniper hidden in the ornate balustrade above adjusted for the perfect shot, rifle glinting in the moonlight, laser sight targeting the most crucial point of Lorenzo's body, his back. He didn't see it coming. Focused entirely on the path to freedom, on the chaos unfolding around him. Only one pair of eyes caught the motion: Isabella's. She had arrived against Sophia's protests, heart hammering with fear and determination, unwilling to remain hidden, unwilling to let the world dictate the terms of her family's survival. Her hands were clenched, legs pumping, every step carrying years of fear, longing, and love, closing the distance in desperate hope. "Lorenzo!" she screamed, a sound that cut through gunfire, chaos, and adrenaline, carrying the weight of a lifetime of sacrifice. He turned just as the world seemed to pause for a heartbeat, instinct screaming too late. The sniper fired. The crack of the rifle echoed across the courtyard, a sound both deafening and intimate, a bullet slicing the air with lethal intent. In that split second, Isabella leapt forward, arms outstretched, body rigid with determination, shielding Lorenzo with everything she had, everything she was, and everything she refused to lose. Time seemed to fracture, slow and stretch, caught in the tension of the moment, as the bullet hurtled toward the only thing standing between Lorenzo and death. Dust hung in the air, screams and shouts froze mid-air, the world condensing into the single terrifying instant where one leap could decide the fate of the Rossi heir, the woman who had saved the child, and the man who had reclaimed them both. The sniper's bullet collided with its target, and the courtyard erupted into chaos. Isabella's body jolted, Leo screamed, Lorenzo's hands shot out to catch her. But as the smoke and echoes cleared, it was impossible to tell. Had the bullet struck the woman who protected his son? Or had fate twisted in their favor just enough for survival? Silence hung heavy, broken only by distant shouts, leaving the night trembling on the edge of revelation and devastation. The bullet sliced through the night air like a silver blade, whistling toward its target with lethal precision. Time slowed in that heartbeat, each second stretching into an eternity as Isabella's figure hurtled forward. Lorenzo's reflexes, honed over decades of blood and betrayal, surged into action. He lunged, catching her in a tight iron grip just as she collided with him, her body trembling violently against his. The world was reduced to the metallic taste of adrenaline, the heat of her breath against his neck, and the echo of gunfire bouncing off the villa walls. Marco, ever vigilant, appeared on a balcony in a blur of motion, rifle raised and steady. With a single, precise shot, he felled the sniper, the crack of the gun splitting the night as the threat evaporated in a plume of smoke. Lorenzo held Isabella against him, chest heaving, fingers clutching her arms with the ferocity of a man who had lost everything and would never allow it again. "You came," he whispered, voice hoarse with emotion, fear and relief blending into one raw, unrelenting chord. Isabella's tears glistened in the moonlight, streaking her cheeks, but her eyes were resolute, burning with determination. "I told you," she gasped, voice trembling yet fierce. "I won't run anymore." Their reunion was a violent collision of past regrets, present fears, and the promise of a shared future. A moment that crystallized everything Lorenzo had fought for: his empire, his vengeance, his love, and above all, his family. Outside, sirens wailed, announcing the approach of Moretti reinforcements. The night alive with the distant roar of engines, the threat of renewed assault, and the imperceptible tension of unseen eyes tracking their every movement. Marco barked over the chaos, voice taut with urgency. "Boss, we need to leave, now!" Lorenzo's jaw clenched, eyes sweeping the courtyard, calculating routes, escape points, and contingencies. He drew Isabella close, wrapping her protectively in a single iron embrace, and whispered with cold certainty, "We're going home." But not to the Rossi estate. No palace of wealth or symbols of conquered enemies. Somewhere quieter, somewhere hidden, somewhere theirs. Somewhere the wolf could finally lay down his head without fear for those he loved. The convoy moved like ghosts through the countryside, engines muted beneath the moon, carrying with it the weight of a man who had traded kingdoms for a family, whose empire had been reborn not in fear, but in the shadows, where loyalty, love, and blood were the only currency that mattered. Months passed, and the new Rossi Empire operated with a precision previously unseen, built on clean fronts, stealth, and the relentless focus of a man who had seen the cost of weakness. Lorenzo had not softened. His eyes remained steel, his hands ready, his mind sharp, but he had shifted priorities. Love, blood, and legacy now defined him. In the lush garden of their heavily secured estate, sunlight warming the stone paths, Lorenzo observed his son, Leo, now 6. Perched on a chair at a chessboard, eyes alight with concentration. Each move, each subtle deception on the board, mirrored the cunning of the Rossi line. "You think like a Rossi," Lorenzo murmured, pride and affection mixing in his voice. Leo's grin was irrepressible, bright with innocence and inherited cunning. "Mama says that's trouble," he replied cheekily, leaning back, hands resting lightly on the table. From the terrace above, Isabella laughed softly, a sound of pure joy that seemed almost alien to the man who had lived decades in violence and shadows. Her hands rested gently on her rounded belly, a new life forming, a new legacy growing beside the one Lorenzo had already claimed. The wolf rose, crossing the garden with silent power, and pressed a tender kiss to her forehead, the first moment of softness in years. A silent vow that all threats, all darkness, would be met with ferocity for the protection of his family. "I gave up a kingdom," he murmured under his breath, voice low, rich with emotion and reflection. "But I built a dynasty. The world could burn, empires could fall, enemies could strike, and yet this moment, the laughter of his son, the warmth of his wife, the pulse of life around him, was untouchable, sacred, and immortal. He had traded power for something immeasurably greater: blood, love, and the unshakable certainty of family. Peace had finally touched the wolf, though not through surrender, not through weakness, but through the calculated, unyielding protection of everything that mattered most. The estate remained silent except for laughter, the soft rustle of the wind, and the occasional chirp of a bird. A false serenity under which Lorenzo's eyes, always scanning, always calculating, never truly rested. And then, from the distant edge of the forest, movement. A shadow detached itself from the dark, limbs taut and deliberate. A figure, unseen, unheard until now, whispered into a phone with chilling calm. "Yes, I found the boy," came the low, dangerous tone. "The real war begins now." Lorenzo's gaze hardened, a muscle tightening in his jaw as instinct flared. The wolf had built a family, a dynasty, and a sanctuary. But the world beyond the walls had not forgotten, had not forgiven, and had not ceased hunting. The final moment of peace, however fragile, hung on the knife's edge. From the shadows, the watcher's silhouette shifted, disappearing back into the forest, leaving behind only the echo of their words and the unshakable promise that the war for the Rossi heir was far from over. Lorenzo's hand instinctively went to the grip of his concealed pistol. The wind rustled through the trees, the estate's walls shivering in silent anticipation, and the wolf, blood, love, and legacy fused into a single, unyielding force, prepared to face the storm that was coming.